because it has a lot of pictures. So all I'm going to do is just kind of quickly tell you what we've provided. We're here really speaking today in support of the elements of the governor's recommendation to fund the school finance law that was passed over the past years in response to the Gannon case. And so all I've set out in my testimony is to give you a little longer background over some issues, the long-term trends in Kansas education funding, some of the impact we think that has made on Kansas educational attainment. I note that in the about 8-year period between 2010 and 2018, Kansas fell behind on several measures compared to other states, compared to inflation, compared to teacher salaries, some test score data, and that's what the Gannon decision, or that's what the Gannon settlement, if you will, or plan was designed to address. The rest of my testimony, I just basically give you some information on how districts have used that money in the first 3 or 4 years of the plan, so you have, I hope, some idea of what the focus will be as we go forward for the next several years. Where's the money gone to positions? What types of programs have been supported in it? We know, of course, that the landscape has changed because of the COVID pandemic. We expect that will have a negative impact on student achievement. We know that. Fortunately, there are additional resources being made available that we hope can help address that. So really, our point is just to say our top priority is to continue to support the plan that the legislature adopted, and really this committee, not all of you were on it, worked very hard to put together over the past several years, has been accepted by the court. That's our top priority, and I'd just be happy to take any questions if that's appropriate, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Tallman, tell us, what is your position on the enhancement requests that were rejected by the governor, as well as the reduction of resources that are outlined?
I believe that, and without remembering everything, we would be supportive of all of those enhancements, whether it's funding special education or the dyslexia coordinator or anything else. Those are all things that we would fit into our policy positions. But as we've talked to our members, what we think to them is most important is to continue to fund the plan that was outlined and adopted. So I'm not really here to comment. I can talk about those, but we felt we should give you what we heard from our members was our top priority, and that's what it was. But we don't have any objection at all and would really support, I think, virtually everything on that list, or certainly many of them we would have a position of support.
One thing I would have as a request, because I know that the governor has limited as far as funding for ACT and the work keys, but since we have added the pre-ACT and students have participated in that, what we haven't heard from school districts is what their plan is as far as utilizing that information within each school district to help the kids based on what they did in their pre-ACT, how that will be impacted as far as directed study and so forth to prepare for those subsequent school year.
As you know, and we've talked, there's a lot of information for districts to use, and certainly part of what we support them doing is getting ever better at using that knowledge to shape their curriculum to help us improve. So, I mean, I agree, and we certainly appreciate the legislature's support of that program.
Okay, and one thing I will like to hear back from you on is specifically with regard to dyslexia. I would like to know what of our 286 school districts are using that Read Ready curriculum.
Are using the recommended curriculum from the department?
Yep.
I'll see, as you know, we can't always tell you. We can only ask and depend on them to tell us, but we'll see what we can do.
I think that as we move forward, it's going to be important that we know that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Tallman, I do have a question here in your testimony. You showed that Kansas fell behind in per pupil funding. Is there a way we can overlap this chart in Kansas rankings on standardized tests, on national standardized tests, not just Kansas state assessments?
I could, so you would like to try to see a chart that would show that? Or do you want me to anecdotally respond, or?
Yes, you could answer in your own words, but what I'm asking is, just because we're showing that we're not funding at the same rate of adjusted for inflation as other states, doesn't necessarily mean that test scores are lagging behind. And it's my understanding that Kansas has developed their own state assessments that are not used by any of the other 49 states. So how are we comparing apples to apples in our performance in relation to funding?
Here's what I can tell you very quickly. Although the Kansas assessments are developed very different from the NAEP test, which has been a long time, the last data we have, the performance is very, very similar. NAEP has a level they call at benchmark, and we have a level we sometimes call at grade level, and they're very similar. And the NAEP has a level they call proficient, and we have a level that is sometimes called college ready. Those results are very consistent. What we saw was that on our old state assessment during the 2010s, performance was generally rising. It then kind of flattened and has fallen back on both the NAEP and on our state tests, although we had a gap of a year. But I'll be happy to try to share that with you, Senator. I'll try to put something together on that more specifically.
In some ways, we'd be more interested in NAEP since we know that some states, such as I believe it's New York, require all kids to take the ACT. We know that there are other states that require all students to take that. The state of Kansas makes it available for all students. It does not require. And so what is reported is actually, and that composite score that we get at the end of each school year is actually a composite of all kids that tested for their senior year. So that would include kids in USD's private schools as well as homeschooled. So it's not, that would give us the broadest, it would give us the broadest, but it's going to be a snapshot of all kids that senior year that tested.
I will say that on page 5, I have some data that shows the percent of our Kansas students that tested proficient in all 4 areas compared to the national. And while that varies among states, over that period of time, we stayed pretty consistent with about 70 to 75% of our kids taking it. But as Senator Baumgartner has indicated, that's going up now that we've made available to all. I think it went up to about 85, approaching 90, and we think it'll go a little bit higher.
Committee, other questions? Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding that, how, we're talking about the ACT. There are many states that almost exclusively use the SAT, particularly on the coast. We're using those to compare.
Well, the data I have in here, we used ACT because that is, we think, the most consistent for us. We do occasionally sometimes show information where we try to look at states we calculate what you would predict a state score to be based on the percentage of kids that take it. So Kansas, for example, we are often like in the top 10 on the SAT, but we give it to very few kids. There are other states, as you say, where they have everyone do it. But if you do the math that tells you where you would be expected to rate, you can then kind of see, are you above or below where you thought you'd be? I don't have that in there, but that's one way you can kind of look at comparisons. The other thing, we have this data, is you could look at states that are just similar to Kansas. So there's about maybe 10 or 15 other states around us, not the whole country.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Switching gears a little bit, and thank you for being here in person today, Mr. Tallman. You work for KASB, correct? And it's my understanding KASB receives its funding from school districts, correct?
Yes, we receive funding either in dues, which members pay to belong, and then another part of our budget comes from services. So people attend a meeting, or if they have us do legal services. So, but yes, essentially all of our funding comes from our members either in dues or services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Follow up, if I may. Can you give me an estimate, or do you know how much school districts give in dues and services to KASB per year approximately?
Our revenue is probably, it's several $1 million. I don't have our specific budget in front of me. Note I'll always make is you see me more than anyone else on our staff. Our advocacy staff is certainly a minority of our total staff and services. So those dollars go to a wide variety of things that we provide, but I can get you those numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head.
Wonderful, thank you. And can you, just quickly, can you tell me what fund school districts pay their KASB dues out of? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, I'm confident they pay it out of a fund they can legally pay it out of. I think that could be the general fund. It could be your supplemental general fund. I think, so it's probably going to be out of one of those. If there might be some cases where, so for example, one of the services we provide is, for some districts, is workers' compensation insurance. So in that case, there may be a fund specific to that. I don't recall. So it could come out of different places depending on the purpose. But dues, I imagine, would come out of the general fund or the LOB.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Tallman, on page 5 of your testimony, you're showing the average annual teacher salaries, and your chart shows that they're declining from approximately 2010 to 2019 when adjusted for inflation across our region. Now, teacher salaries are determined by local school districts, correct? So what is your chart insinuating here? I'm not a statistician, but I know we can usually make numbers say whatever we want them to say.
Well, I would read this chart with the previous chart that just shows adjusted for inflation, dollars available per pupil had not kept up with inflation or had not kept up with the national average or regional average, because the biggest expenditure districts make is on salaries, in particular teacher salaries. This just shows that that average salary also fell as well.
So you're saying that if, with more funding, that local school districts would most certainly raise teachers' salaries?
Yes, yes, I believe so. And in fact, this, because it's national data, is trailing. This goes back to 2018-19. That was I think the first year that additional funding started coming in, maybe the second. We do know that average salaries over the last 2 or 3 years after Gannon money came in, there were higher annual increases than there had been in the previous 8 years.
Okay, thank you. But school districts have always had the option of increasing those teachers' salaries and foregoing new desks or a new building or something else, correct?
Broadly speaking, yes. There's differences in how you can use pools of money, but yes, that is a choice.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee, we are going to, at this time, I think that I will call on Norma. Can you share with us the information that was provided us as far as the COVID relief funding for K through 12 ed?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Would you like me to? I can email Cindy a spreadsheet and a memo that I have on that COVID funding, and then I can either review it right now with the committee, or I can provide a very brief overview and allow you to review it on your own.
I think you can give us that brief overview.
Certainly. So for the three pool.
I'm sorry, Cindy just said, go ahead and send it to her. So we'll do it
All
that
right.
way. Thank you.
Yep. Give me 1 second. All right. So I've just provided to Cindy a brief COVID federal fund memo that just includes general information on 3 specific pots of money. The first pot is the CARES Act coronavirus relief funding that went to the counties. So there was $400 million allocated by the SPARK committee to counties. Approximately $76.2 million of this went to K-12 educational institutions, so that's school districts as well as other organizations that sought funding. The second pot is also CARES Act funding. That's that $84.5 million that the agency touched on yesterday. $76.1 million had to be allocated to school districts. The reserve was used for special education funding, and then 0.5% was used for administrative costs. The memo also includes those 12 funding purposes, and those are drawn directly from the CARES Act language. And then the third pot of money is the most recent funding from the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, or CRRSA. And that is also through that ESSER funding. Again, 90% must be allocated to school districts. And the remainder can be used as directed by the Department of Education. And that was $369.8 million. So it was about 4 times as much as was allocated under the CARES Act. And it added an additional 3 purposes, which were also kind of covered under the CARES Act. The CARES Act essentially said at the end, and any other purpose tied to COVID. And so those purposes can kind of be built into that. And so approximately $332.8 million has to be allocated to the school districts. So that's what the memo touches on. And then the spreadsheet that I also provided breaks down the funding by county and school district. And I can provide physical copies as well. This includes those 3 pots. So the first one is the CRRSA funding. This is the preliminary allocation. The second part is for the CARES Act, and that includes 2 funds sources. So that includes both that allocation that has to go to the school district, as well as the $8 million for special education. So you'll see that broken down. It includes both the allocation, the funding drawn down so far, and that's through the end of January, and then the remaining funding, and that's all by the school district level. And then the second half of the spreadsheet touches on that CRF funding received by school districts. As of January, the Office of Recovery's website was only posting the totals allocated by the county to K-12. However, I have been provided the school district level, and I will be updating the spreadsheet to reflect what each individual school district received from that county money. But the current spreadsheet only has the total that county allocated to K-12. So it's now broken down by school district level. And then the last 3 columns are things that the school district noted in previous reconciliation documents as either items to be purchased or items that had been purchased. And then county-wide expenditures and proposed plans that touched on K-12. And all of that information was pulled from reconciliation documents in August and September for that county CRF. So that is a very quick kind of review of those 2 documents that provide some more detail on that COVID funding beyond just the totals allocated to the state. And I can stand for any questions on that.
Committee, what questions do you have? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Norma, I'm looking at the chart that the spreadsheet that you just sent, and your last comment was about that you said that the last funding that's federal funds that have come down are just by county. So I'm just going to take Wyandotte County. So I'm looking and I see $37+ million to the county. That would be to the county.
Yes, so those last columns that are all under the CRF, the first allocation is the CRF funding allocated to the county as a whole from that $400 million. It's not CRF money allocated to the county for K-12. So that first column under the coronavirus relief fund distribution to counties is just what is allocated to the county from that 400 million. So that could
Okay.
be used for any of those COVID expenditures.
So is that second column then the allocation? Is that the school piece?
Yes, so the column entitled December allocation estimate is the estimated allocation to K-12 per the Office of Recovery dashboard. And as I noted, I can provide an updated spreadsheet, hopefully to the committee by tomorrow, with those numbers broken down by school district as well, so you can see what each school district received.
Madam Chair. And then just as a follow-up with that, so when there's talk about maintenance of effort, when it comes to these federal funds, so is we're looking at an education budget, and you talk about the current budget and looking at forward, but yet the maintenance of effort when in relation to federal funds, can federal funds replace under the current school finance formula?
Madam Chair, so I think for maintenance of effort, the funding has to be the 3 preceding years what the state spent. So those are for those ESSER funds. You can't use federal funding to meet a federal maintenance of effort requirement. You can't use these federal funds to meet the federal maintenance of effort requirement, if that's.
You have to maintain your maintenance of effort.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And for the ESSER funding received under both KRISA and the CARES Act, I believe it was the expenditures for the preceding 3 fiscal years. I think it was fiscal years 2017 through 2019. But Craig or John could probably speak more to that from the Department of Education.
Thank you.
Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And looking at your spreadsheet again, and the county's allocation, and then the December allocation to the districts, it's not by district. It's just as a lump sum by county. So do you know, and you may not know this, but do you know how the counties determined how they were going to allocate those dollars between multiple districts? In previous explanations, folks have used the Title I formula to distribute.
Certainly. So I can't speak to how each county chose to allocate those funds. My understanding is that the Department of Education encouraged school districts to reach out to the counties if they thought they could use some of that county CRF. So I don't know if it was simply on the school district requested X amount of funding and the county gave it to them, or how they determined each of those. As I noted, so the December allocation is the total for K-12, but I will be able to provide to the committee tomorrow the county CRF by school district, so you'll be able to compare the school districts within the county.
Thank you.
I think you will see that even the first example I saw was Reno County, and they really do kind of identify, they're going to create that grant process. So they are going to take 1.1 million, and so some of them already have figured that out. We'll look forward to that information tomorrow. Really not seeing any other questions. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Norma. This may be for you or another conferee, but the GEARS funding that was received as part of this act, if I understand right, do we have that approximately 26.6 million funds? Have we received that allocation yet?
So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, so the GEARS, if you're referring to the funding allocated under the most recent appropriation, so that KRISA, I can't speak to whether or not that's been received. That's none of the GEAR funding, either under CARES Act or KRISA, is included in the spreadsheet or the memo. I believe the majority of the GEAR funding under the CARES Act went to higher education. And then my understanding is under the most recent, under CRISA, the GEAR Act, some of that is designated for K-12 private schools. That's not included in either my memo or my spreadsheet.
Quick follow-up, Madam Chair, if I may. So there's also a provision in there that says that those funds have to be spent within 6 months. Do you know if that's from the time the state receives the funds? When does that clock start ticking on that 6 months?
Madam Chair, I can't speak to the GEARS Act requirements. Craig or John may be able to provide more information on when that 6 months. I can tell you the ESSER funding can be obligated through the most recent pot from CRISA can be obligated through fiscal year 2023.
Thank you very much, Norma. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Committee, I want us now to move to this next portion of the hearing, and that is the information with regard to the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind. So if we could move into that, please. Yes. The one that we're using for this discussion, it's going to be thick. It's going to start with the actual of fiscal year 2020. If you don't have a hard copy, it is going to be on the website. The smaller version, where it says actual at the bottom, even though it says February 2nd, 2021, at the top where you see the column of actual, if it says fiscal year 2019, that was just that sample that was used for the tutorial. That was actually what they used last year. So you're going to want to make sure that you get online and you get the larger packet.
Madam Chair, is it going to be under documents or is it going to be under testimony?
It should be under documents. Testimony? Okay, there we go. Committee testimony.
Could we request that the department provide those to us for the next meeting? Like they did the education budget?
We can.
Thank you.
Certainly. Madam Chair, this is Norma. If you'd like, I can print out the hard copies and have Matt run up and provide them to the committee right now, if you'd like, before we move on to the budgets, or we can just work from the online version.
I think we're going to need to start with the online. It would be great to have the printed, but we only have 20 minutes left, so I would like us to get started.
Certainly. Is there a school that you'd prefer to start with?
So. Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
would you like me to start with the School for the Blind or the School for the Deaf?
Let's go ahead and start with the School for the Deaf.
Okay. All right. So for the School for the Deaf, you should be seeing a table with fiscal year 2020 actuals of 12.4 million total, 10.5 operating, and just about 2 million in capital improvements. I will note that the fiscal year 2020 GovRec was about 12.6 for this, and I believe they didn't fund the language assessment program in that fiscal year either. And I sent you the fiscal year 2020 actuals for both the School for the Blind and the School for the Deaf in an email yesterday. The School for the Deaf, you'll see in the agency overview, is located in Olathe, and its mission is to ensure that deaf and hard of hearing students achieve their full potential in a language-rich environment. And I'll note that the school offers a comprehensive curriculum for deaf and hard of hearing students up to the age of 21, and they use both American Sign Language and English as integral parts of the school program. And the agency is responsible for the implementation of the statewide language assessment program. Turning to either page 5 if you're using the draft version, or I believe it's page 882, you'll see the performance measures. It's 877. You'll see the performance measures again, so you see the number of students enrolled in the campus-based program is probably the key performance measure you're looking for there. And then turning the page, you'll see the 10-year operating budget, or the operating expenditures, followed by the sum of operating budget. And then turning to page either 8, if you have the draft version, or to page 880, you should be looking at the budget for the current year. That's fiscal year 2021. There were a couple changes to the approved budget for fiscal year 2021. First, you have a reappropriation of $401, and that was based on reimbursement of expenditures from the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And so the SGF got reappropriated into 2021 and then deleted. You'll see this in a number of budgets. And then you also have a decrease of about $79,000 as a result of the allotments. That is due to Caper's death and disability, and then again, coronavirus relief swap of funding. The agency is requesting a revised estimate of $11.8 million, including $9.4 million SGF. This is an all funds decrease of about $216,000 or 1.8%, and an SGF decrease of about $400 below the approved amount. The agency is requesting 143.5 FTE positions, which is the same as the approved number. This includes an operating budget of $10.4 million, including $9.4 million SGF. And that's an all funds decrease of about $207,000 or 2%, and an SGF decrease again of that $401. And that's primarily due to decreased expenditures for contractual services related to travel reimbursement and decreased computer software maintenance costs. And these decreases are partially offset by an increase in salaries and wages due to the filling of a full-time housekeeping position. And turning the page to 881, I'll note that the agency is requesting a capital improvements budget of $1.4 million, all from the State Institutions Building Fund. I can provide greater detail at the end of the budget analysis on that. And the Joint Building Committee has reviewed the capital improvements budget for both the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind. The governor is recommending total expenditures of $12.2 million, including $9.4 million SGF, and an operating expenditures budget of $10.7 million, including $9.4 million SGF. This is an all funds increase of about $321,000 or 3.1% above the revised estimate. And that's attributable to the Office of Recovery allocating funding to the School for the Deaf for COVID-related expenditures. And the governor's recommendation for capital improvements budget also increases. That increases of about $120,000, and again, that's attributable to the allocation of CRF for HVAC plasma ionization devices. And again, I can provide greater detail during the capital improvement section. Still on page 881, you'll see the governor's allotments. And again, that was for Caper's death and disability, which was statewide, and then the coronavirus relief swap. So that was some swapping of expenditures from SGF to that coronavirus relief fund. And I can pause there for any questions on fiscal year 2021, or I can move into fiscal year 2022.
Are there questions on 2021? Let's go ahead and move forward.
All right, so on page 882, you'll see the fiscal year 2022. Underneath that table, you'll see that the agency is requesting $12.2 million, including $10.1 SGF, and an operating budget of $11 million, including $10.1 million SGF. It's an all funds increase of about $624,000 or 6%, and an SGF increase of about $626,000 or 6.6% above the fiscal year 2021 revised estimate. That's primarily due to increased expenditures for salaries and wages for staff and contractual services associated with the Language Assessment Program, or LAP, Phase 3 implementation. The agency is requesting $1.2 million for capital improvements, all again from that State Institutions Building Fund for fiscal year 2022. And the governor is recommending total expenditures of $11.6 million, including $9.6 million SGF, and an operating expenditures budget of $10.5 million, including $9.6 million SGF for fiscal year 2022. You'll see at the bottom of page 882, this is a decrease of about $467,000 or 4.2% below the agency's request. That's wholly due to the governor not recommending the agency's enhancement request to fund that LAP program. Turning the page to 883, you'll see that enhancement detail. So again, the governor is not recommending the agency's enhancement request for the implementation of phase 3 of the language assessment program be funded. And I can pause there for any questions on that or move to the reduced resources.
What questions do you have? Senator Petty.
I'm not sure, maybe Norma could expand a little bit on the enhancement funding. I think it might help to have a little bit of background about how this program got adopted, but actually the implementation wasn't paid for.
Certainly. So the language assessment program was a recommendation from the Commission on Deaf and Hard of Hearing. It was first, so it's set to be implemented in 5 phases. Phase 1 and phase 2, the costs were absorbed by the school, and that served 20 children the first phase, and then 64 in the second phase. And in total, it was about $207,000 for the 2 phases that were absorbed by the School for the Deaf. Phase 3 would expand the program to 250 children. This was asked by the agency last fiscal year as well, so to be added as an enhancement in fiscal year 2021. It was not added by the legislature. It was set instead for review at omnibus. It was not funded. And so this is just the cost for mostly salaries. You'll see about $264,000 is for salaries and wages for 4 new FTE positions. And the remainder is essentially all for contractual services, mostly for in-state travel to implement the program. So the agency is simply asking for the additional funding rather than continuing to absorb every expansion.
Committee, other questions? Senator Petty, did you have a follow-up?
I don't know if Norma has this, but on that particular program, do we know if they were able to continue their phase, I think, continue to stay up with their phase process due to some of the restrictions that came about with COVID-19?
So my understanding from the agency is there was some suspension of some activities. They're currently still in the phase 2, so phase 3 is simply an expansion. It was first implemented in fiscal year 2019. Fiscal year 2021 was originally scheduled for phase 3. And as part of the reduced resources package, the agency did submit the suspension of the language assessment program, but it was not recommended by the governor.
Thank you.
Committee, any other questions? I'm not seeing any other questions at this time.
Okay, so we can move to the next page, which details those reduced resources. You should be on page 884. Or if you're still on the draft version, page 12. As I noted, the governor did not accept any of the agency's reduced resources submission. So the agency submitted 10%, which was about $960,000, 7.5 FTE positions, and the governor didn't recommend reducing the agency's budget for fiscal year 2022. And I can pause for any questions on the reduced resources.
Committee, are there questions on reduced resources? Senator Gossage.
Could you explain reduced resources?
Certainly. Yeah. So the governor requested, the governor in fiscal year 2021 was able to allot a portion of the budget because of how the statute defines the budgeting process. So for fiscal year 2022, the governor requested agencies with state general fund monies provide a reduced resources package of 10% for fiscal year 2022. This agency provided this package, which totaled about $960,000. And then the governor could either recommend or not recommend in the same means as a normal budget package. And she did not recommend accepting any of the agency's reduced resources for the School for the Deaf. And you'll see something similar in the School for the Blind.
So if I may, Madam Chair, so if I'm understanding correctly, she asked all agencies to reduce their budget by 10%?
She did specify agencies, and it's going to be those agencies with state general fund monies as well. So fee-funded agencies would be funded differently. So she requested from specific agencies with state general fund monies reduced resources packages. So the Department of Education also submitted a reduced resources package.
So she asked them to reduce it by 10%. They did so, and then she said, okay, never mind, my recommended budget is not going to reduce that by 10%. I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly.
Certainly. So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, the reduced resources budget is the agency's proffered a portion of the 10% of their budget that she could cut. And in this case, the governor chose not to accept any of that. She recommended fully funding their budget as requested without the enhancement request. But she did not recommend reducing their budget as part of the reduced resources package.
Thank you for the explanation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, let's move on.
All right, turning a couple pages, you'll see program detail. There are 3 programs. So you should be on page 887. There are 3 programs in the School for the Deaf, and you'll see this mirrored in the School for the Blind. Administrative services, instructional services, and support services. Administration is the main administrative branch. Instructional is going to be the largest portion of the agency, and that's the instruction. And support services are things like housekeeping, essentially supporting the campus. I can either go into program detail or I can move on to capital improvements.
Let's move on to capital improvements, please.
All right, so turning to the last page. So you should be on page 894 is where capital improvement starts. The agency is asking for a capital improvements budget of about $1.4 million. Again, that's all from the State Institutions Building Fund. I will note in fiscal year 2021, there was a reappropriation of SIBF of about $169,000. The agency is requesting that about $8,700 of that be deleted, and that the remainder, which is approximately $154,000, be continued into fiscal year 2021. The majority of that, so that $154,000, was attributable to savings during the Roth Building HVAC renovation that the agency intended to expend in fiscal year 2020 for a theater communication system in the Roth Building auditorium. The agency was unable to bid that project in fiscal year 2020 due to COVID, and so they're asking that that reappropriation be continued and that they can use that, so they can use that funding in fiscal year 2021, and so that it not be deleted. And then they have 3 major categories of capital improvements: so safety and security systems, campus boilers and HVAC upgrades, and rehabilitation and repair. And those are those 3 major categories there. And then the governor, if you turn the page to 894, is recommending a capital improvements budget of $1.5 million, all from special revenue funds. So in addition to the State Institutions Building Fund money, the governor added about $119,000, or 8.6 above the revised estimate, and that's attributable to the Office of Recovery allocating that funding from the Coronavirus Relief Fund for the School for the Deaf for HVAC plasma ionization devices in classrooms to limit the spread of COVID-19. And I can pause there for any questions on fiscal year 2021. I will note joint building did recommend the capital improvements budget as recommended by the governor for fiscal year 2021.
Committee, are there any questions at this point on the capital improvements? Would you now go over the instructional services for us?
Certainly, Madam Chair. And would you like me to first review for fiscal year 2022 capital improvements, and then I can backtrack to instructional services?
Okay, yes, I'm sorry.
You're fine. So there's just one thing I'll note in the fiscal year 2022. The governor did not recommend $171,000 that the agency requested from the State Institutions Building Fund for the upgrade of the West Campus playground. So that upgrade would add DuraSafe rubber tiles to the playground to make it ADA compliant. And that's part of the agency's rehabilitation and repair request. So that's why you have a decrease. You'll note the agency's requesting about 1.2 million and the governor's recommending 1 million. And so that's the difference between those two, is the governor didn't recommend that funding. And again, joint building recommended the governor's recommendation, although it noted concern over the not funding of an ADA compliant playground at the School for the Deaf, and that both Senate Ways and Means and House Appropriations should review that funding. And if there's no questions on fiscal year 2022, I can move back to instructional services.
I'm saying that none. Let's go ahead and move back to instructional services.
Certainly. So instructional services starts on page 890. Well, 889 includes kind of the breakdown of what that includes. So the day program, the student life program, the extended school year. So that's a 3-week program, as well as their outreach services. So this includes consultations, professional development training, a resource library, parent support. That's all included in the instructional services. So on 890, you'll see the performance measures specific to instructional services, as well as then a breakdown of the salaries and wages, contractual services, commodities, capital outlay, and aid to local and other assistance. So these are the major categories of expenditures. For fiscal year 2021, the agency requested 7.9 million, including 7.3 million SGF. This is an all funds decrease of about 466,000 or 5.6%, and an SGF increase of about 60,000 or 0.8% from the amount approved by the 2020 legislature. And those changes are attributable to two major categories of expenditures, salaries and wages. You see a decrease of about 230,000 due to decreased expenditures for temporary staff, retirement contributions, and health insurance. So that temporary staff includes coaching and paraprofessionals, and these expenditures fluctuate on a year-to-year basis depending upon the needs of the students. And in contractual services, there was a decrease of about 300,000, and that's partially attributable to, so that SGF increase is due to some shifting of expenditures for teacher tuition reimbursement out of contractual services. And then there's decreased contractual service expenditures for travel reimbursement and that computer software maintenance costs. And the governor concurred with the agency's request in fiscal year 2021. And for fiscal year 2022, the agency requested 8.5 million, including 7.9 million SGF. This was an SGF increase of about 596,000 or 8.2%, and an all funds increase of about 597,000 or 7.6% above the fiscal year 2021 revised estimate. Again, that's mostly attributable to salaries and wages and contractual services, primarily in the agency request. That's that language assessment program phase 3 implementation. And the governor recommended 8 million, including 7.4 million SGF. And it's a decrease of about 467,000 below the agency's request, solely attributable to the governor not recommending the language assessment program phase 3 implementation. And I can stop there for any questions on instructional services.
What questions do you have on instructional services? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Norma, back on the top of 890 under performance measures, that is if we look up there, that's a reflection of, or please tell me that's what it is, but I think it's a reflection of how many school districts that the school for the deaf works with through either cooperative services or tiny K to provide services. Is this correct?
Yes, so my understanding of that first performance measures, yeah, those school districts, or there are cooperatives that serve multiple school districts. And then the Tiny K programs, all of them that receive assistance from the School for the Deaf. So that could be equipment or specific outreach services.
And so if I'm looking at this and I see that the actual has increased since 18 from 92 to 114, is that correct?
The actual for fiscal year 2020 would actually be that 125.
25. Okay, thank you.
I'm not seeing other questions. I think that you can go ahead and move on.
Okay, and that is all I had for the School for the Deaf, unless you'd like me to go into the other two programs.
I think it would be helpful. At this time, I think we're going to pause. We're almost out of time, and so we will continue the School for the Blind on Monday. But we do have an individual. We have Luann that's here, and she is the superintendent of our Kansas School for the Deaf, and she does have a little bit of testimony for us. Luann, welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairperson and committee. I wanted to thank you for the opportunity for me to be able to come before you and give some testimony. The legislature has always been a longtime supporter of the School for the Deaf and allocating the funding. I know that one of your top priorities is to focus not only on the campus-based program, but the outreach program as well. You just noted that the numbers of districts that we work with and co-ops and tiny K networks has increased to 125. And our goal is to continue to expand those programs throughout the entire state. And I know over the last several years, you've had a keen interest in how KSD can provide services throughout the state for children that are deaf or hard of hearing that don't attend the campus program. Up until our programming continues to expand, not only based on our enrollment numbers, but the numbers of students that are receiving appropriate quality services throughout the state. And so again, we appreciate your continued support to be able to serve those other students. I did want to just tell you a little bit about the programming right now and where we're at. We have been doing on-site learning since the beginning of the school year in the fall. Obviously, our students need that visual access to communication and information and the learning environment, and they just do better if they're here on campus. At the beginning of the year, we had 75% on-site and 25% remote, but with the COVID relief funding, we were able to make the environment much more healthy and safer for our students to be able to return. And we had more students return at that point. And now we're about 95% on campus learning. I wanted you to also be aware that we are, again, making that request. And we do appreciate the governor's concurring with the budget that as requested. And so I'm here to ask for your consideration of the enhancement request for the $466,658 for the language assessment program. As you may or may not be aware, last year we were at this same point. We were requesting that funding because it would be difficult for us as a school to expand that programming without those additional funds. And then COVID happened and we didn't get to continue that process. And so I'm back again this year to ask for that enhancement of the funding for the language assessment program. Again, the $466,658. And a little bit of history for you. In 2016, the legislature, both the House and the Senate, unanimously agreed to pass this law stating that every child between the ages of birth to 8 who are deaf or hard of hearing within the state of Kansas be assessed on an annual basis to ensure that they're meeting the age-appropriate language milestones, and that to ensure that they're developing the language skills that they need. The Kansas School for the Deaf was given the responsibility of assuming and implementing that program statewide to be in compliance with the law that was put in place. And all of that happens based on newborn hearing screenings that we receive. And previously, we were aware that there were about 650 kiddos within the state between ages birth to 8. And more recent numbers show that that number is over 700 at this time. Without these additional funds to be able to support the statewide language assessment program, the gaps that exist and the delays in language for these children will continue to grow further and further behind. The initial language assessment report, we reported that of the children that were assessed, only 20% of them did meet the language milestones. And then the second year of the report, it showed that 73% of them did not meet the language milestones. And with the third year that I'll be reporting tomorrow, that number is even more disheartening. It's showing that the number of children who have not met the age-appropriate language milestones has actually dropped to 79% of the children. And we were able to assess 64 children, and that is a smaller number because of COVID. We weren't able to go into homes to do the assessments, and so there were a smaller number assessed. But again, the number is higher for those not meeting their language milestones. The reason for the huge drop in those numbers is because we are now assessing older children between the ages of 5 to 8. And so they started out before the assessment that they were language delayed. So they did not have that early access to language at a younger age, or the opportunity for that starting at birth. And over the next several years, we do predict that there will be a continued decline in the report and in the numbers. And keeping in mind that we will not be able to expand the number of students that are being assessed without that additional funding. As of this year, our goal was to be able to assess 250 students throughout the state. However, with the limitations of our staff capabilities and resources, we have only been able to assess a small number of students. And so I do hope that you will take that into consideration. And, you know, in order for us to be able to catch these children early and get the interventions in place as early as possible, we are in need of that funding to be able to do that. And then that would enable these children to be at the same level as their hearing peers as far as their language. Again, without that additional funding, there will be children who will continue to show delays in their language and in their skills. And what that will mean for their future is that they won't be ready for kindergarten, and they will continue, and that will continue to impact their education throughout their career and their social and emotional outcomes. And so they will continue to decline. And, you know, these children deserve an opportunity to be able to acquire language just like any other child would. And so they do need those early intervention services. And of course, that requires funding.
Thank you very much. Committee, we are out of time. I do want to thank not only Norma, but I appreciate the testimony that we received today.
Madam Chairperson,
Yes.
Luann was continuing to speak, and she
Sorry?
didn't see that you were announcing the closing. And so I'm going to pick up where she's at now, the interpreter, and she says, I know that this is a statute that's in place. And so from a budget standpoint, again, we are requesting this enhancement to meet the statutory requirements of the language assessment program. And that is with KSA 755397E. Thank you for your time, and I can answer your questions now.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the testimony that we received from our superintendent there for the School for the Deaf. We are going to need to end our meeting now because some folks need to be up on the Senate floor, others have meetings. We will continue this. I know that, Luann, you are going to provide testimony for us tomorrow. So we will have that. And committee, we will finish the information with regard to the School for the Blind on Monday. Thank you very much. Committee meeting adjourned.